A poor cowboy handed Bessie a key before she ever saw the house he had been hiding. The churchyard had gone silent. Bessie stood on the wooden step, wind pulling at the blue ribbon on her wrist, while Luke Whitman held the papers no one expected him to have. Frank would not look at her. Harvey Knox's jaw tightened. Then Bessie opened her hand and stepped forward. "Tell me, would you have trusted Luke?" The morning Bessie Monroe was called down from the back room, dust was already pushing under the door of Frank Monroe's store. It came in thin brown lines across the floorboards, slipping past sacks of flour and barrels of nails, settling on the counter where Bessie had polished the glass jars before sunrise. Outside, Pine Hollow was waking slow. Wagon wheels creaked in the street. A mule brayed behind the livery. Somewhere near the saloon, a man coughed hard and spat into the dirt. Bessie wiped her hands on her apron before she stepped into the room behind the store. She still had a needle mark in her thumb from the dress she had finished for Ellen the night before. A neat blue dress with the hem turned twice because Ellen said decent women did not walk around looking unfinished. Bessie had sewn it by lamplight until her eyes burned. Then she had folded it over a chair and gone to bed without supper. Now Ellen Monroe stood near the window wearing that same dress. Frank sat at the pine table with his hat off and his mouth tight. There was a paper in front of him. Beside it lay an ink bottle, a dull brass pen, and a receipt with the saloon stamp pressed crooked in the corner. Across from him sat Luke Whitman. Bessie knew him the way everybody in Pine Hollow knew him. A quiet cowboy with a gray horse, a coat too worn at the elbows, and boots that looked like they had crossed half the territory. Men at the feed store laughed when he passed. Women lowered their voices and said he worked where he could, slept where weather let him, and owned little more than his saddle. He did not look like a man who had come to buy anything. But when Bessie stepped into the room, Frank would not meet her eyes. That was when she knew. Ellen folded her arms. The window rattled behind her as a gust came through the alley. "Stand straight," she said. Bessie did, not because Ellen told her to, but because bending had never helped her. Frank cleared his throat. "The debt has come due." Bessie looked at the paper. She could see the number even from where she stood. $350. The ink sat dark and ugly on the page. Frank tapped one thick finger beside it. Feed account. Store credit. Saloon note. Interest besides. He swallowed, then reached for his coffee cup, though it was empty. "Mr. Whitman has agreed to settle it." Bessie did not move. The room seemed to narrow. The walls drew close, the smell of coffee grounds, lamp oil, and old tobacco pressed against her throat. "Settle it how?" she asked. Her voice came out calm. Too calm, maybe? Ellen glanced at her as if she had expected tears and was irritated not to find them. Frank picked up the pen, then set it down again. "You'll marry him." The street noise outside went thin. Bessie heard the groan of the sign over the store. Monroe Goods and Dry Stock. She had painted those letters herself 2 summers ago, while Frank stood below and told her not to drip paint on the porch. She had scrubbed this floor, stacked these shelves, carried flour through snow, sat up with Ellen when fever ran through the house, mended Frank's shirts, cooked meals, counted coins, smiled at customers who looked past her hands to the color of her face and decided how much respect they owed. And all of it had come to this paper. A price, a line, a debt somebody else had made. Bessie looked at Luke Whitman then. He sat still, hat in his hands, dust on the brim. His face was not soft. It was weathered, brown from wind and sun, with a jaw that looked made for keeping words behind it. But his eyes were on the table, not on her body, not on her dress, not on the way Ellen had pinned her hair too tight that morning. He looked like a man sitting beside a grave he had not dug. Frank pushed the document toward him. "Sign here," he said. Luke did not reach for the pen right away. For the first time, he looked at Bessie. Not long, not bold, just enough that she understood he saw she was standing there. "Does she know the terms?" he asked. Frank's face reddened. "She knows enough. That was not my question." Ellen's mouth tightened. Outside, someone dropped a crate in the store, and the sound cracked through the room. Frank leaned back. "She is my niece. I am responsible for her. This keeps the Monroe name out of court and gives her a lawful husband. Better than some girls get." Bessie felt her fingers curl once, then loosen. Luke's eyes moved from Frank to the paper. "What belongs to her?" he asked. Ellen gave a short laugh. "Belongs to her?" Luke did not turn his head. "Her clothes, her sewing things, anything she bought or made." Frank waved his hand as if swatting a fly. "She can take her bag. That is not what I asked." Silence sat down hard at the table. Bessie looked at Luke again. There was no smile on him, no warmth offered for show. He simply waited, still as fence wire in frost. Frank shoved the pen toward him. "She can take what she can carry." Luke picked up the pen. The scratching of his name across the paper sounded too loud. Bessie watched the ink dry. There was no preacher in that room, no flowers, no white veil, no hand laid gently over hers. Just a debt receipt, a tired table, and Ellen standing in the blue dress Bessie had sewn. When Luke finished, he set the pen down carefully. He folded the paper once, then again, and slipped it inside his coat. Frank let out a breath like a man freed from a rope. Ellen stepped toward Bessie with a small cloth bag. "I packed enough." Bessie took it. It weighed almost nothing. She looked toward the stairs that led to the little room above the store where she had slept since she was 14. There was a tin box under her bed with 3 buttons, 2 hairpins, a ribbon card, and a dime wrapped in cloth. There was a gray shawl hanging from a nail. There was her mother's thimble, worn smooth at the edge. She started toward the stairs. Ellen caught her wrist. Not hard, but fast. "You do not need to make a scene." Bessie looked down at the hand on her arm. Luke stood. The chair legs scraped once. Ellen let go. He did not speak to her. He did not need to. Bessie went upstairs. The room was cold, even in daylight. She packed the tin box, the shawl, the thimble, and a folded work dress with a patched sleeve. She paused beside the bed and ran her fingers once over the quilt. She had made it from scraps no one wanted. Brown, cream, dull red. Nothing pretty from far away, but strong when held close. She left it. Downstairs, Frank had opened the front door. A few people had gathered outside, pretending to study the barrels of apples near the porch. Mrs. Vale from the boarding house. 2 boys from the livery. Old Mr. Pritchard with his pipe cold in his teeth. News traveled fast in Pine Hollow, especially when it was not kind. Luke's wagon stood in front of the store. Plain wood. Iron-rimmed wheels. A gray horse hitched steady between the shafts. The horse turned its head when Bessie came out, one ear flicking toward her. Luke lifted her small trunk into the back. He did not offer his hand right away. He looked at the wagon step, then at her, as if giving her time to choose how to climb. When she reached for the side rail, he only stood close enough to catch her if she slipped. She did not slip. Ellen came to the doorway and folded her arms over that blue dress. Frank stayed inside the shadow of the store. Bessie sat on the wagon seat with the cloth bag in her lap and her spine straight. She did not look back at the upstairs window. She did not look at the porch. She fixed her eyes on the road beyond town, where the dust rose pale under the morning wind. Luke climbed beside her and took the reins. As the wagon started forward, a woman's voice drifted from near the apple barrels. "Poor thing. Married off to a man with less than a roof." A few people chuckled low. Bessie kept her face still. But Luke's hands changed on the reins. Only a little. The leather drew tighter across his knuckles, then eased. He said nothing. They passed the church with its whitewashed boards and crooked bell, past the livery where a black mare stamped in her stall, past the dry creek bed that gave the town its hard seasons and harder name. The road opened west, toward the low hills where folks said Luke kept a mean little cabin with smoke stains on the ceiling and nothing in the pantry but beans. Bessie waited for him to turn south. He did not. At the fork near the cottonwood stump, Luke guided the gray horse north. The wheels left the main road and took the narrow stone track toward Red Butte. Bessie turned her head. "That is not the cabin road," she said. Luke looked ahead, the wind pulling at the brim of his hat. "No," he said. The wagon climbed toward the dark cut between the hills, where pine shadows gathered and the town disappeared behind them, one roof at a time. For a while, Bessie kept her eyes on the road behind them. Pine Hollow shrank into a strip of pale boards and chimney smoke. Then the last roof slipped behind the shoulder of the hill, and the town was gone. Only the road remained. It was not much of a road, more stone than dirt, climbing steady between dry grass and low pine. The wagon wheels knocked over loose rock, and each jolt traveled through the seat into Bessie's bones. She held the cloth bag in her lap with both hands. It had the shape of emptiness. Luke Whitman drove without hurry. The gray horse knew the climb. It leaned into the traces, ears forward, breath puffing white in the cold. A leather strap creaked. A chain under the wagon bed tapped in rhythm with the wheels. Above them, Red Butte rose dark and hard, its cliffs cut with narrow gullies where old snow still clung in shadow. Bessie looked at Luke once. His hat brim was pulled low. Dust from town still sat on the shoulder of his coat. There was a tear near the cuff of his sleeve, stitched with black thread by a hand that knew function better than beauty. Nothing about him explained this road. She had heard of his cabin. Everybody had. A slant roof thing south of the creek, folks said. One room. Bad stove. No proper window. Men said it smelled of horse blanket and old beans. Women said any woman taken there would learn the meaning of hardship before supper. But the wagon had not turned south. The higher they climbed, the colder the air became. Pine branches leaned over the track. Their needles brushed the wagon side with a dry whisper. Somewhere beyond the trees, water moved under ice, soft and hidden. Bessie finally spoke. "Where are you taking me?" Luke did not answer at once. He guided the horse around a rut deep enough to catch a wheel, then loosened the reins again. "Home," he said. Bessie looked toward the dark ridge ahead. "That is not what folks call your home." "No," he said. There it was again. That small word, no more than a stone dropped in a bucket. She waited for the rest. It did not come. The road narrowed between two walls of red rock. The wind changed there. It no longer came wide across the plain. It slid through the cut with a low sound, almost like someone breathing through closed teeth. The wagon entered the ravine, and the light dimmed. Bessie's fingers tightened around the bag. Luke noticed. She could tell by the way his right hand moved, not toward her, but toward the brake lever, slowing the wagon before the steepest turn. "You are safe on this road," he said. She looked at him. "Roads don't worry me much." His jaw shifted once. "No," he said quietly. "I expect they don't." The ravine bent sharply, and the horse climbed the last rise. Then the trees opened. At first, Bessie saw only iron. A gate stood across the road, tall and black, fixed between two stone posts, half covered in vine. One hinge had rust along the edge, but the bars were straight. A metal plate hung near the latch, worn by years of weather. She could not make out the words from the wagon seat. Luke stopped the horse. He climbed down, boots landing on hard ground. From inside his coat he took a ring of keys, not one key, a ring. The sound of them was small, but in that quiet place it carried. Bessie watched him unlock the gate. It opened inward with a slow groan. Beyond it, the road changed. No longer a track of loose stone, it became a lane, narrow but laid with care. Flat rock set deep into the ground. Pines stood on both sides, old and tall. The wagon rolled through, and the gate swung behind them, not shut, just half closed in the wind. Bessie turned forward. The mansion appeared slowly. First the roofline, dark slate above the pines, then the chimneys, then the front wall of gray stone, broad and still, with tall windows catching a strip of winter light. The house sat against the slope as if it had grown out of the mountain itself. Not pretty in the way townhouses tried to be. Stronger than that. Older. Quiet as a held secret. Smoke lifted from one chimney. 2 horses stood in a fenced paddock near the barn, their heads low over hay. A long porch ran across the front of the house. Near the steps, a stack of split wood had been covered with canvas and tied down with rope. A water trough stood under a pump. The barn roof was weathered, but straight. Bessie did not speak. She could not make the picture fit. Luke drove toward the house and stopped beside the porch. "This is Whitman's stone house," he said. The name sounded too large for the man beside her in the torn coat. Bessie looked at the stone walls, the clean windows, the iron lantern by the door. "You said home." "It is." She turned to him. "People said you had nothing." He looked toward the house. A shutter moved in the wind and tapped once against the frame. "People say what keeps them warm." Before she could answer, the front door opened. An older woman stepped out, thin and upright, with gray hair pinned hard against her head. She wore a black wool dress and a white apron with one corner tucked into the waistband. Her eyes moved over Luke first, then the wagon, then Bessie. No smile came. "Mr. Whitman," she said. "Hattie." The woman's gaze settled on Bessie's small bag. Luke came around to the wagon. Again, he did not grab her hand. He stood beside the step, close enough if needed, far enough not to claim. Bessie climbed down by herself. Her shoes touched the stone yard, and for some reason that made her feel more uncertain than the dirt street in Pine Hollow had. Luke lifted her trunk from the wagon bed. Hattie watched him carry it. "Room upstairs is ready," she said. Luke nodded. "Thank you." Bessie followed them into the house. The front hall smelled of cold stone, beeswax, and smoke from the hearth. Her footsteps made a soft sound on the floor. A wide staircase rose along one wall. There were portraits covered with thin cloth, a long table with a brass lamp, and a rug faded at the edges but clean. The house was not dead, but it had been quiet too long. Bessie felt it in the covered furniture, the closed doors, the dust lying in the carved lines of a banister. This was not the home of a rich man showing off. It was a place kept standing by habit and grief. Luke carried her trunk upstairs. She followed, one hand skimming the rail without meaning to. The wood was smooth under her fingers. At the end of the hall, he opened a door. The room inside was small compared with the rest of the house, but larger than any room she had ever had to herself. A narrow bed stood against the wall with a wool blanket folded at the foot. A washbasin sat on a wooden stand. There was a pitcher, a clean towel, a chair, and a window looking down across the valley where pines thinned into pale grass. Luke set the trunk at the foot of the bed. On the table beside the basin lay a key on a folded white cloth. Bessie looked at it. Luke saw where her eyes had gone. "The lock works from inside," he said. "No one enters unless you say." Hattie made a small sound in the hallway. Not quite disapproval, not quite surprise. Luke did not look back at her. Bessie stood beside the bed with her cloth bag still in her hands. "What am I meant to do here?" she asked. Luke looked at her for a moment. The question seemed to land somewhere he had not braced for. "Rest today," he said. "After that, what you do is yours to say." That is not an answer men usually give. No, he said. I know. He stepped toward the door, then stopped. Supper is at 6. You may come down. Or not. Then he left. Hattie remained in the hallway a second longer. Her eyes moved over Bessie's face, her coat, the bag, the room. Whatever judgment she made, she kept it behind her teeth. There is hot water in the pitcher, she said. Not much. Enough, thank you, Bessie said. Hattie nodded once and walked away. The hallway floor creaked under her steps. Bessie closed the door. She did not lock it at first. She stood in the middle of the room and listened until the house settled again around her. A log shifted somewhere below. Wind pressed against the glass. A horse struck the paddock rail once, then went still. Only then did she pick up the key. It was heavier than it looked. She turned it in her palm, feeling the cold iron, the teeth cut clean. A room that locked from the inside. A door that belonged, at least in that one small way, to her. Bessie sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress did not sag through. The blanket smelled faintly of cedar. She opened her cloth bag and took out the tin box, the shawl, her mother's thimble. Last came the patched work dress. She laid each thing on the bed, as if counting what remained of herself. Then she opened the top drawer of the table. Inside lay a folded handkerchief, a spare candle, and something blue. Bessie stopped. She reached in slowly. It was a strip of ribbon, faded at the edges, folded twice and tied with old thread. Not fancy, not silk, just blue cotton ribbon, the kind sold by the yard at fair booths and church socials. But Bessie knew that shade. She knew the uneven cut at one end. 5 years ago, at the Pine Hollow Fall Fair, she had sold small ribbon cards from a crate near the wash tent. She had needed medicine for her mother. Ellen had said there was no spare money. Frank had said sickness came and went. So Bessie had sold what she could. Ribbon, buttons, 2 pieces of lace, anything she had saved. This blue had been the last of it. She remembered wrapping it around a card with cold fingers. Remembered mud on her hem. Remembered coins dropped in her palm. Remembered counting them behind the tent while the fiddle music played too loud and her mother coughed into a cloth at home. Bessie held the ribbon in both hands. The room seemed to tilt without moving. How had it come here? She looked toward the closed door. Downstairs, a man's step crossed the hall and faded. Not hurried, not hiding. Still, the ribbon lay in her hands like a question he had placed there years before she ever knew to ask it. Bessie folded it again, careful along the old crease. Then she slid the key into her pocket, placed the blue ribbon under her pillow, and turned toward the window. Below, Luke Whitman stood by the gray horse, loosening the harness. He did not look up. The mansion watched from the mountain behind him, stone by stone, silent and waiting. Bessie did not ask about the ribbon. Not that evening. Not the next morning. Not on the third day, when the question had already worn a path through her mind. She kept it folded under her pillow, tucked beneath the corner where her hand could find it in the dark. At night she turned the key in the lock and lay awake listening to Whitman's stone house breathe around her. The place made sounds like any old house. Timber settling, wind pushing at the shutters, a low pop from the stovepipe when the fire took. Once, near midnight, she heard steps pass along the hall and stop outside her door. Bessie held her breath. No knock came. After a moment, the steps moved on. In the morning, when she opened the door, there was no sign anyone had been there, only the hall runner, faded red and brown, and a strip of pale light reaching from the stairwell. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of coffee. A cup sat near the stove, not on the table where Luke ate, not in front of his chair. Near the stove, where she could take it or leave it without sitting across from him. Bessie stood in the doorway and looked at it. Luke sat at the kitchen table with a ledger open beside his plate. He wore the same old coat, though the house was warm enough without it. His sleeves were rolled once at the wrists. There was a small cut along one knuckle, fresh and clean. He did not say good morning. He only turned one page of the ledger and reached for his own cup. Bessie crossed to the stove. She took the coffee. The tin cup was warm against her fingers, rough at the rim where the enamel had chipped. Hattie Doyle stood at the sideboard slicing bread. Her knife moved with short, hard strokes. "Breakfast is eggs and corn cakes," Hattie said. "If you eat." Bessie looked at her. "I eat." Hattie set a plate down. "Then sit before it cools." There was no sweetness in the words. But there was a plate. Bessie sat at the far end of the table. Luke kept his eyes on the ledger. Hattie turned back to the stove. Outside the window, the gray horse moved along the paddock fence, nose low to the frost. Nothing was asked of Bessie. That unsettled her more than orders would have. Back at Frank's store, every silence had an edge. If Ellen set a cup down too hard, Bessie knew what work had been missed. If Frank cleared his throat, she knew coins had come up short. Here. Silence sat without reaching for her. She did not trust it. After breakfast, Luke folded the ledger and stood. "I need to check the south pasture," he said. "You should know where things are." Bessie's hand stopped on the cup. "Should I?" He looked at her then. A person ought to know the ground under her feet. Hattie's knife paused on the breadboard. Bessie pushed back her chair. "I will get my shawl." The morning had a hard shine to it. Frost silvered the rails and lay white along the wagon tracks. Luke walked beside her, not ahead enough to pull, not close enough to crowd. The gray horse followed loose behind him, reins over one arm. He pointed out the barn first. "Hayloft above. Tack room to the left. Grain bins are marked. Well freezes if the lid is left open. Then the smokehouse. The chicken yard. The little stone springhouse set into the slope. Beyond that, the land opened wide and fell into a shallow valley fenced in split rails and wire. The creek runs low this time of year," he said. "In spring, it rises fast. Don't cross it after 2 days of rain." Bessie looked at the ribbon of water below, thin and dark under ice. "You tell that to all women you bring here?" The words came out sharper than she meant. Luke stopped. The gray horse breathed against his shoulder. "No," he said. He did not explain more. That made her wish she had not spoken. They walked on. Near the lower paddock, a black mare stood alone, head high, ears pinned back. Her coat caught the light like wet coal. When Luke came near, she stepped away, dragging one hind foot just enough for Bessie to notice. Bessie slowed. Luke saw her looking. "She does not like strangers," he said. "She favors the left hind." He turned to the mare, then back to Bessie. "You know horses?" "I know hurt when it tries not to show." The mare shifted again, tail flicking. Luke went to the fence and rested one hand on the top rail. He did not whistle, did not reach, just stood there, quiet. After a time, the mare's ears came forward a little. "Name's Juniper," he said. "She caught wire before I bought her. Gus says she was never right after." Bessie moved closer to the fence, slow enough that the mare did not step off. "Wire cut can heal outside and pull wrong underneath," she said. "Needs salve. Maybe warm cloth if she lets you close." Luke looked toward the barn. On a shelf in the tack room was a small brown jar, a roll of clean cloth, and a bucket with a bent handle. He brought them back and set them on the rail. Then he stepped away. Bessie looked at him. "You are not going to tell me how?" "No." The answer was quiet. She took the jar. Juniper watched her with one black eye. Bessie dipped 2 fingers into the salve and let the mare smell it first. The wind pressed at her shawl. Her shoes sank slightly in frozen mud near the fence. She waited until Juniper lowered her head and blew warm air across her wrist. Only then did Bessie touch the injured leg. The mare flinched. Bessie stopped. "That's right," she murmured. "You can say no." Luke stood several paces away, his hand loose at his sides. By the time Bessie finished, her fingers were cold and smelled of camphor and pine tar. Juniper had not settled fully, but she had not struck out either. Luke took the jar when Bessie offered it. Their fingers did not touch. "Thank you," he said. It was plain, not grand enough to be a trap. That afternoon, Bessie found the laundry room behind the kitchen and set herself to work because sitting still made her thoughts too loud. There were sheets in a basket, shirts needing cuffs turned, and a stack of towels worn thin down the middle. Hattie found her there after an hour. "You do not have to earn your plate," the old woman said. Bessie kept folding. "I know how to work." "That was not what I said." Bessie looked up. Hattie's face gave nothing away. She only picked up a towel, inspected the edge, and handed it back. "Turn that hem. It'll last longer." Bessie almost smiled. Almost. Days found a slow shape after that. Coffee waited near the stove. Luke showed her the ranch a piece at a time. Gus Miller tipped his hat from the barn door and said, "Morning, Mrs. Whitman," as if the words were ordinary and not something that struck the air clean out of her lungs. Mrs. Whitman. No laugh after it. No twist in his mouth, just a title set down gently and left there. The mansion still held too much dust. Bessie saw it in the unused parlor, in the library with sheets over the shelves, in the music room where no one had touched the piano in years. But beneath the neglect, there was order trying to survive. Labels on jars, nails sorted in tins, seed sacks dated in charcoal, receipts bundled with string. One evening, when Luke left a ranch ledger open on the kitchen table, Bessie saw the mistake before she meant to. 3 entries for oats. Same hand, same week. Different amounts. One receipt from Danner's feed in Pine Hollow had been copied twice and raised the 3rd time. She stood over it, frowning. Luke came in carrying firewood. He saw her looking. "Something wrong?" Bessie stepped back. "It is not mine to say." He set the wood in the box by the stove and came to the table. He did not take the ledger from her. He only turned it so the lamplight fell better on the page. "If you see it, mark it." Bessie looked at him. He slid a pencil across the table. It was sharpened clean. She picked it up and circled the false number. Luke watched without comment. Then he went to a cabinet near the pantry and brought out 2 more ledgers, their corners worn soft from use. He placed them beside her. "If you see more," he said, "mark them." Bessie stared at the books. At Frank's store, she had done sums for years and watched Frank take the credit. Here, Luke set the work in front of her and stepped back as if her mind needed room. She sat down. For the first time since arriving, she forgot to be afraid for nearly an hour. The knock came 3 days later, not at the front door, at the iron gate. Gus rode up from the lower road with his hat pulled low. "Woman at the gate," he told Luke. "Says she's kin to Mrs. Whitman." Bessie was in the hall when she heard it. The cup in her hand went still. Luke looked at her first, then at Gus. "Open it." Ellen Monroe came up the lane in Frank's small wagon, dressed in brown wool with a feather pinned to her hat. The same hat she wore on Sundays when she wanted people to remember she had once lived back east. She stepped down without waiting for help. Her eyes went to the stone house, the tall windows, the barn, the land falling away into the valley. Something in her face changed, quick and greedy before she smoothed it over. "Bessie," she called, smiling thin. "There you are." Bessie stood on the porch. Luke remained 1 step behind her, not hidden, not leading. Ellen climbed the steps and kissed the air near Bessie's cheek. "My," she said softly, "this is quite different from what we were told." Bessie did not answer. Ellen looked past her into the front hall. "Your uncle has been troubled, very troubled. It seems Mr. Whitman did not present himself honestly. Luke said nothing. Ellen turned to him. A man with a house like this ought not play poor when arranging a marriage. Luke's voice stayed even. Frank arranged the debt. And you arranged the advantage. Ellen smiled again. Harvey Knox says there may be questions. A woman cannot consent properly when important facts are hidden from her. Bessie felt the porch boards beneath her feet. Old wood. Solid. Real. Ellen leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Bessie would hear. A man who hides a mansion can hide a wife just as easily. The words slipped in cold. Bessie looked toward Luke. He had heard. She knew he had. His face did not change, but his eyes moved from Ellen to Bessie, and there was something there he did not speak. That made it worse. Ellen left before dusk, her wagon wheels cutting fresh tracks into the lane. The house seemed different after she was gone. The stone looked heavier, the hall longer. The key in Bessie's pocket pressed against her leg like a question. At supper, Hattie set stew on the table. Gus ate quietly near the stove. Luke poured coffee, then sat. Bessie did not touch her spoon. After a long moment, she reached into her pocket and laid the room key on the table. The small iron sound stopped every hand in the kitchen. Luke looked at it. Bessie kept her voice low. If this house was never meant to be mine, I should not keep this. No one moved. The lamp flame bent once in the draught, and the key lay between them, dark against the worn pine table. Luke looked at the key a long time. Bessie waited for him to take it. Waited for the little scrape of iron leaving wood. Waited for some change in his face that would tell her Ellen had been right. He did not reach for it. The kitchen held its breath. Gus sat with his spoon halfway to his bowl. Hattie stood at the stove, one hand on the kettle, her eyes fixed on the table as if she had seen a grief like this before and knew better than to step into it. Luke pushed back his chair. The sound was quiet. Careful. He picked up the key at last, but only to turn it once in his palm. Then he set it back in front of Bessie. No door in this house belongs more to me than to the person inside it, he said. Bessie kept her hands in her lap. Luke did not wait for an answer. He took his hat from the peg by the door and stepped out into the cold. The door closed behind him with a soft wooden sound. After that, supper ended without supper really being eaten. Bessie went upstairs with the key in her pocket and the blue ribbon clenched inside her fist. She sat on the edge of the bed while the wind scraped pine branches against the window. The room was warm enough, but she kept her shawl around her shoulders. The ribbon lay across her palm, a small blue thing, faded, frayed at the end, a thing from before. Downstairs, a door opened and shut, then another. Boots crossed the yard outside. The mansion settled into silence, but it was not the same silence as before. It had a bruise in it now. Bessie did not lock her door that night. She sat awake until the lamp burned low. Sometime near midnight, the weather changed. The first gust hit the house hard enough to rattle the basin on its stand. Then came another, longer and sharper, sliding down from Red Butte with ice in its teeth. Snow began not as flakes, but as white dust, driven sideways against the glass. Bessie rose and went to the window. Below, the yard was already turning pale. Lantern light moved near the barn. One light, then another. She saw Luke crossing toward the north paddock, coat pulled tight, hat gone, hair dark in the storm. Gus followed with a coil of rope over one shoulder. Then came the sound. A long crack, low and splitting. Not thunder. Wood. A horse screamed from the lower pasture. Bessie was moving before she had thought it through. She pulled on her boots, grabbed her shawl, and ran down the stairs with the ribbon still tucked in her sleeve. Hattie stood in the kitchen doorway holding a lantern. North fence, the old woman said. Wind took it. Bessie opened the back door. Cold slammed into her. The yard was a blur of snow and lantern glow. Gus was already at the gate, fighting the latch. Luke had a rope in his hands and was moving toward the dark shapes bunching near the broken fence line. Bessie ran after them. The snow struck her face like handfuls of salt. Her skirt tangled around her legs. She grabbed the fence rail to keep from slipping and saw the damage then. 3 posts were down. Wire twisted loose. Beyond it, the land dropped toward the ravine where stone waited under snow. The horses milled in panic, dark bodies pressing and turning. Juniper, the black mare, had pushed too close to the gap, her bad hind leg dragging once in the frozen mud. "Easy," Luke called, low but strong. "Easy now." Gus swung wide to turn the others. Bessie saw the rope coil near Luke's feet. She took it before he could stop her. His eyes flicked to her, sharp with warning. "Bessie." "She knows me," Bessie said. There was no time to argue. She moved toward Juniper the way she had at the paddock, slow where every part of her wanted to rush. The mare tossed her head, eyes bright with fear. Wind tore at Bessie's shawl, snow gathered on her lashes. She held the rope low. "That's right," she murmured. "I see you." Juniper stepped sideways. One hoof slipped near the edge. Luke moved, but stopped himself. Bessie saw it, saw the restraint cost him something. She reached the mare's shoulder and laid one hand flat against the wet coat. Juniper shook under her palm. Not from cold alone. "I know," Bessie whispered. "I know." The mare blew hard, breath hot in the storm. Bessie slipped the rope over, not tight, just enough. Luke came in then, careful and quick, taking the far end without touching Bessie's hand. Together they eased Juniper back from the broken place. For one breath, it held. Then the wind hit again. The loose wire snapped against the post with a hard singing sound. Juniper reared back. Bessie lost her footing and went down into the snow, one hand striking frozen ground, the rope burning across her palm. Luke caught the rope before the mare could bolt. Gus shouted from the dark, turning the rest of the horses toward the barn. Bessie pushed herself up, but her hand slipped. Blood marked the snow in a thin red smear. Luke was there at once. He caught her by the arm, lifted just enough to help her stand, then let go the moment her feet were under her. His breathing was hard. His eyes went to her hand. "May I see?" The storm roared around them. Bessie looked at him. No man in Frank's house had asked before taking. Not a cup, not a coin. Not an hour of her sleep. Not the use of her hands. Luke stood in the snow with his coat half open, rope cutting into one glove, waiting. Bessie held out her hand. He took it gently, turning it toward the lantern light Gus had set on a post. The cut was shallow but raw, crossed by rope burn. Luke pulled a clean folded cloth from inside his coat. It was dry because he had kept it close to his chest. He wrapped her palm without tying too tight. "You should go in," he said. "So should you." A brief look passed between them. Not a smile. Not yet. But something tired and human. They got the horses into the barn before dawn. By then, the worst of the wind had passed, leaving the world white and stunned. Gus stayed to nail a temporary brace across the broken stretch. Hattie had coffee ready when Bessie and Luke came in through the kitchen door, their coats stiff with snow. Bessie sat by the hearth with the wrapped hand in her lap. Luke stood near the mantel, looking at the fire. For a long while, neither spoke. Then he said, "I should have told you." Bessie did not look up. "About the house?" "About the ribbon." The fire shifted. A coal broke apart, sending sparks up the chimney. Bessie slowly drew the blue ribbon from her sleeve and laid it across her knee. Luke's gaze dropped to it. "I bought it 5 years ago," he said. His voice was lower than usual. Rougher. "At the Pine Hollow Fair. You were selling bits of ribbon from a crate near the wash tent. I remember the mud that day. I remember you had one glove and one bare hand." Bessie's fingers closed on the edge of the chair. Luke looked into the fire, not at her, as if that made the truth easier to set down. A man near the stalls dropped coins at your feet, like he was doing you a favor. You picked them up, gave them back, and sold the ribbon to a boy instead. You stood there with mud on your hem, and did not let that whole town bend your back. Bessie remembered the man, the smell of whiskey, the laughter near the cider barrel, her mother coughing at home with no medicine left. She looked at the ribbon. "I needed 2 more dimes," she said. "I know." Her eyes lifted. Luke swallowed once. "I heard later your mother was sick. I kept the ribbon because I could not forget the way you stood there." He paused. "When Frank started asking around about settling his debt, I heard who he meant to hand you to." The room seemed to quiet around his words. "Who?" Bessie asked. Luke's face hardened, but his voice stayed careful. "A saloon owner out by Rock Springs. Old man. Mean reputation. Enough money to make Frank stop asking questions." Bessie's bandaged hand went cold. Luke finally looked at her. "I got there first," he said. "That is the truth of it. I signed because I knew what would happen if I did not." Bessie stood. The ribbon slipped from her knee to the floor. "You decided for me." Pain moved across his face, quick and gone. "Yes," he said. "I did." She had expected defense. Maybe anger. Maybe a reason polished smooth enough to shine. But Luke only stood there and took the weight of it. "I told myself it was better than the other choice," he said. "Maybe it was. But it was still a choice I made before you had the chance." Bessie bent and picked up the ribbon. The fire warmed one side of her face. The other stayed cold. "Why hide the house?" "Because if I came as the owner of Whitman's stone house, Frank would have raised the price. Harvey Knox would have put his hand into it. Ellen would have smiled and called it fortune." Luke looked down at his open hands. "And you might have thought I bought you twice." Bessie had no answer for that. Outside, snow slid from the roof in a soft rush. Hattie moved somewhere in the hall, then stopped, giving them the room. Luke took a step toward the door, not toward Bessie. "I do not ask you to forgive me tonight," he said. "I do not ask you to thank me. That key is still yours. The room is still yours. And if you ever want me to take you before a judge and set this marriage aside, I will drive the wagon myself." Bessie stared at him. The words did not loosen the knot in her chest. Not all the way. But they changed its shape. Before she could speak, Gus came in from the back porch, snow on his hat and trouble in his face. "Ryder came up from town," he said, "left a paper at the gate." Luke took it. The seal was dark red. The name at the bottom was Harvey Knox. Bessie saw it from across the room. Gus wiped snow from his beard. "Says Mrs. Whitman is to appear before the church steps in Pine Hollow come Sunday," he said, "to verify the marriage in front of witnesses." No one spoke. The fire popped once. Bessie looked down at the blue ribbon in her hand, then at the bandage Luke had wrapped around her palm. Morning was coming gray over Red Butte, and Pine Hollow was calling her back. By Sunday, the snow had hardened along the road in thin white crusts. Luke hitched the gray horse before sunrise. He moved without waste, buckling leather, checking the wheel pins, tying a folded blanket behind the seat. Bessie stood on the porch in her dark wool dress, the blue ribbon tied around her wrist. Hattie came out with a small parcel wrapped in cloth. "Bread and ham," she said. "Church folk talk longer when they're hungry." Bessie took it. "Thank you." Hattie looked at the ribbon, then at Bessie's face. "Your chin is your own," she said. "Keep it that way." Gus rode behind the wagon on a bay gelding. He had a leather satchel tied to his saddle horn, and he kept one hand near it as if it carried eggs instead of papers. Luke helped Bessie onto the wagon seat, then paused before climbing up. "If you want to turn back," he said, We turn back. Bessie looked down the road toward Pine Hollow. No, she said. I have been sent places all my life. Today I am going. Luke nodded once and took the reins. The ride down from Red Butte was quiet. The mountains gave way to low hills, then to open plain. By the time the white steeple of Pine Hollow Church came into view, the sun had burned through the gray and laid a hard light over the town. Folks were already gathered outside. Men stood near the hitching rail with their hats in their hands. Women clustered by the church steps, shawls tight, voices low. Children were pulled close by their mothers and told to hush, though nobody else was silent. Frank Monroe stood beside Ellen near the front. His face was red from cold or anger. Ellen wore the blue dress Bessie had sewn, but the hem had come loose on one side. Bessie noticed that before she noticed anything else. Harvey Knox stood on the church steps with a stack of papers under one arm. He wore a black coat brushed clean, a narrow tie, and a look that said he had already practiced every word. Luke stopped the wagon. Bessie climbed down before he could offer his hand. That made the whispers shift. Luke came around beside her, but not in front. Harvey smiled. Mrs. Whitman, he said, making the name sound like a question. We are here only to clear confusion. Bessie looked at the church door behind him. White paint peeling near the latch, mud on the bottom step. A hymn board visible through the window with last Sunday's numbers still posted. There was no confusion when my uncle took the money, she said. A few heads turned. Frank stepped forward. Now, Bessie. She did not look at him. Harvey unfolded the top paper. The issue is simple. Mr. Whitman entered this marriage while concealing the true value of his estate. That concealment may bear upon consent and lawful settlement. Until reviewed, Mrs. Monroe should return to her family home. The word return moved through the crowd like a cold draft. Luke reached inside his coat. He brought out the marriage record from the clerk in Laramie, the deed to Whitman's stone house, and a folded letter with the county seal. He held them ready, but Bessie put one hand over his wrist, not to stop him forever, only to stop him first. Luke looked at her. She stepped onto the bottom church step. The boards creaked under her shoes. The blue ribbon at her wrist lifted in the wind. I was forced once, she said. Her voice did not ring. It did not need to. The yard had gone still enough to carry it. I was standing in the back room of Monroe Goods with a debt paper on the table and no one asking what I wanted. My uncle called it duty. My aunt called it luck. Mr. Knox may call it lawful if he likes. Harvey's smile thinned. Bessie looked across the faces she had known for years. The baker who had let her wait at the back door. The woman from the boarding house. The livery boys. Old Mr. Pritchard with his pipe unlit. I will not be forced again, she said. Not by family, not by a lawyer, not by a town that watched me leave and called it pity. Frank's jaw worked, but no words came. Bessie turned slightly, enough to see Luke without leaning toward him. I did not choose Luke Whitman because of a stone house. I did not stay because of a paper. I stayed because at Whitman's stone house a closed door stayed closed. A key was given and not taken back. A man knocked before stepping near what was mine. The wind moved through the yard. Ellen looked down. Bessie raised her wrist, and this ribbon was not a chain. It was proof someone saw me once, years before I had anything to offer him. Luke's eyes lowered for a breath. Then Hattie Doyle stepped forward from beside the wagon. She had ridden in the back without a word, wrapped in a heavy gray shawl. I kept house for Luke Whitman's mother, she said, and I keep house there now. That woman has not been used as servant or showpiece. She has been given a room, a key, work when she chose it, and silence when she needed it. Gus dismounted and opened the leather satchel. He handed Luke an old ledger, then looked at Harvey. And Mr. Knox knows more about Whitman's stone house than he ought, Gus said. His name is on 2 letters offering to buy the place through a false claim before Mrs. Whitman ever got there. Luke laid the letters on the church step. Harvey's face went pale in patches. The preacher came down from the doorway and lifted one paper, then the other. His mouth tightened. "Seems this meeting has cleared more than one confusion," he said. No one laughed. That made it worse for Harvey. He gathered what papers he could with stiff fingers, but one slipped and skidded into the mud. He left it there. Ellen stepped back as if distance could save her from being seen beside him. Frank stared at Bessie, and for the first time in her life, he looked smaller than the room he had once trapped her in. Bessie came down from the step. Luke stood waiting. He did not touch her. She reached for his hand herself. The ride back to Red Butte felt longer, but not heavier. The valley opened before them near dusk, and Whitman's stone house caught the last gold light in its windows. It did not look like a secret then. It looked like a place waiting to be lived in. Spring came slow after that. Snow withdrew from the fence lines. Juniper's limp eased. Bessie opened the library windows and beat dust from the curtains. She planted yellow flowers along the porch where the mountain wind could not take them. Hattie showed her where Luke's mother had kept the good linens. Gus taught her which gate stuck in rain. Bessie wore the room key on a cord beneath her collar. One evening, when the grass in the lower pasture had turned green and the horses were coming home in a loose line, she found Luke by the fence. He heard her coming and turned. She stood beside him, close enough that their sleeves nearly touched. "Luke Whitman," she said, "if you still mean to ask. I would rather ask first." He took off his hat. For a moment, all the quiet in him opened. "Then I am listening," he said. Their true wedding was held in the valley below Red Butte, with no debt paper on a table and no bargain between men. Bessie wore a dress she had sewn herself. The blue ribbon was tied at her wrist. Hattie cried once and denied it. Gus stood straight as a fence post and called her Mrs. Whitman, like he had known it from the beginning. When Bessie walked back through the front door of Whitman's stone house, she did not enter as a debt paid. She entered with her own key. And this time, she opened the door herself. Maybe that is why Bessie's story stays with us. Not because of the stone mansion, or the hidden ranch, or the papers that proved who owned what. Those things mattered, but they were never the heart of it. The heart was a woman who had been handed from one decision to another, standing at last before a door no one could open for her. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine being told your life had already been settled by someone else's debt, someone else's fear, someone else's greed. Then imagine meeting one person who did not rush you, did not claim you, did not ask you to be grateful for being saved. He simply placed a key in your hand and waited until you believed it was yours. That kind of love is quiet. It does not always arrive with speeches. Sometimes it looks like coffee left near the stove, a room no one enters, a hand offered, then pulled back until permission is given. A man strong enough to protect, but gentle enough not to possess. Bessie did not just find a home in Red Butte. She found the courage to trust her own footsteps again. Tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Luke after learning the truth? And if stories like this still find a soft place in you, stay with this channel. There are more journeys ahead, some tender, some mysterious, some carrying the kind of healing we do not always know we need until the final door opens.